The Unmarked by Matt Fleagle. Chapter 24. The End of the Tree. "We can't let that woman escape," growled Grimwit. "Telewish and I can follow her," Selawan said. "No, don't," said Glista. "That's what she wants, to divide us. If you want to defeat her, you'll need to regroup at daylight and decide on a course of action straight away. For, unless I'm mistaken, she will strike Glenwood Village as soon as the sun rises. What she demanded from you willingly will now be seized by force." Feralus sighed. "She is right," he said softly. "It is time to sort everything out before this predicament ruins us all. Whatever happens, I don't think we can hold off all Verliston's scouts, not without the help of beasts like these. Even then—" His voice trailed off. Several gray heads in the crowd nodded gravely. Feralus cleared his throat and spoke again. "In my judgment, this young woman," he motioned toward Glista, "is no enemy of ours. She risked her life to save a Dellblood child, unmarked though he is. There can be no doubt left as to her courage and to her loyalty should battle with Verliston come to pass." Glista offered Feralus a half bow, and for the first time that night, lowered her sword. "And Kaleb Dellblood," he continued, "though I still have grave reservations about you, I no longer believe you defiled our tree or kidnapped Madge." Kaleb smiled. "Thank you, Head Elder." "Now, as to what to do," the old man muttered. "Firstly, some of you grab those 2 Stonerender scouts. They will be taken into custody." Here several strong men clasped Verliston's 2 scouts by their shoulders to keep them from fleeing. Their daggers were confiscated. "Secondly," he continued, "we must decide, as Dellbloods, whom or what we will trust. Now I admit to being at a great loss, for I can think of no proper course to take." Feralus turned toward Madge. "We Dellbloods have followed our traditions strictly for many centuries. They have kept us unified. They have kept us safe. That mark on your neck, the Stonerender emblem, throws it all into confusion. How are we Dellbloods to proceed justly? Must we abandon the traditions that have made us who we are? Must we throw out the myths we have sung over our children's cradles for as long as we can remember? To accept you or your mother back into our fellowship is to reverse the ancient tide of our history." Here some of the elders behind Feralus mumbled in assent. "What is a Dellblood?" he said much louder. "If he or she is not marked by the sacred tree, can we deny the very symbol that made us into the people we are?" Whispers sailed through the crowd like a stiff breeze massaging branches, but no one present could produce an answer to Feralus's question. Then Kaleb said, "With great respect, Head Elder, it seems to me that our people's first mistake, one made long before even you were born, was to gamble our people's destiny on ancient traditions we barely understood. Like all of you here, I used to think the world ended at this clearing, that an old tree in a quiet forest made all the difference in the world, in my world. But in the last 2 days, I crossed into a completely different world. What I've seen, what I've heard, has undone what I am, or at least what I thought I knew about myself. I know it's frightening, but look around, my friends. We're living among bears and wolves and dragons. We cannot hide out from violence any longer. We cannot even control the magic coursing through these trees. We can't define each other, Dellblood or Stonerender, by myths handed down from our grandmothers." "And how do you propose," said Feralus, "that we step into this world you describe? For as you said, none of us know anything about it." In Amber's arms, the unmarked baby suddenly cried out, then quieted down again. All the Dellbloods who once dodged Kaleb's eyes in the streets were now gazing at him in silence. But Kaleb Dellblood had no answer for Feralus. Just then, Kaleb heard a faint sound, like the rumbling of thunder in a distant valley, but it was coming from somewhere above him. He took a step backward and squinted up at the highest limbs of the sacred tree. Far above him, in the winking twilight before sunrise, something caught his attention. Way up in the highest of branches, Kaleb saw a faint green fog forming and heard the faint rumbling sound again. It was a distant and familiar music. The fog twinkled emerald in the waning moonlight as it wove its way through the treetop. Kaleb stood still for a few moments, gazing up at the fog. Everyone else looked on curiously as the mesmerized log splitter stared upward. Glista and the beasts, who were standing closest, saw a tear run down Kaleb's cheek. "What are you looking at, young man?" said Fearless after some time. "Are you all right, Kaleb?" Madge said. "Say something, Kaleb," said Teva. Without answering them, Kaleb took a deep breath. Then he lifted the rebuilt axe Fallwrinkle had made, high above his shoulders, gripping the jagged handle between his cold hands. "Glista," he said. "Yes." "Form a line between me and the people." "Why, Kaleb?" said Glista. He looked back at her with a resolute expression. "I know how we can save the Dellbloods from the Stonerender scouts," he said quietly. "You do?" "I do, but they will not like it, at least not right away. You and Grimwit and Teva, you cannot let them near me until I finish." "What are you going to do with that axe, Kaleb?" Glista said. "Please trust me," was all he said. Glista nodded. Kaleb approached the sacred tree. The fog was now dancing in its upper branches. "What is that boy up to?" one of the elders said in a concerned voice. Kaleb twisted his strong hands around the axe. He felt a tingling in his fingers as liquid strength seemed to bind his flesh to the handle. Kaleb raised the axe. Just then the axe began to glow with an emerald green color, just as Fallwrinkle's cane had shone the night he danced the ancient history of Parison for the animals. "What's the meaning of this?" hollered Fearless as he took a cautious step forward. "Young man, don't do something you'll regret." Fearless signaled for several of the men in the crowd to seize Kaleb, but the men stopped in their tracks almost as soon as the command was issued. For the moment they took a step in Kaleb's direction, Teva and Grimwit launched themselves into the men's path, barring them from Kaleb. Their two sets of white teeth flashed in the moonlight. Glista took a position beside them, waving off the crowd with her sword. "If anyone attempts to cross us, he will taste my sword, or their fangs," she announced to the Dellbloods. Behind her, Kaleb took a deep breath and reared back the glowing axe. The crowd gasped as the unmarked log splitter, using the same powerful swing by which he had leveled hundreds of tilbury trees since the first day of his exile, buried the axe head deep into the meat of the sacred tree's trunk. Green and blue sparks flew out of the tree. They fell like glistening raindrops all over the earth around the roots. Kaleb dug his axe out of the tree's trunk with a deep grunt and swung it again. He slammed the axe head over and over into the trunk of the tree. Most of the crowd had never seen the young man demolish a tilbury tree. A mix of terror and awe overcame them as Kaleb, his eyes streaming tears, assaulted the smooth bark of the tree over and over. The children in the crowd clutched their mothers' hands tightly, or else buried their faces in their mothers' tunics. Amber shielded the baby in her arms from the shower of sparks that shot up and trickled down onto them with each stroke of Kaleb's axe. But her fears were unfounded. The sparks, as it turned out, were not hot. Soon the glowing embers floating through the air speckled Teva's shiny coat and even the back of Glista's uniform. Yet neither of them felt anything but warm, comforting sensation, like the touch of a mother's hand or the nuzzling of a furry animal at your side, until the sparks on their backs burnt out. Sweat ran down Kaleb's rippling neck and arms, yet he never stopped to catch his breath. Grunting with each fierce stroke, Kaleb brought his axe down again and again into the tree's broad trunk. As he did, images flashed through Kaleb's mind. Images of Freylin fighting a horde of stone renders on the cobbled streets of Ablaran. Pictures of Teva falling fangs bared upon a scout in Verliston's dungeon. The sight of Glista slicing the air with her blade while staring down her swarming aggressors. Each had proved their courage, but Kaleb had long questioned his own. He was not trained to fight in battle. He lacked the grace, skill, and temperament of a warrior. He knew his people had written him off as an outsider long before they labeled him a traitor. But years of wielding a heavy axe alone in the fragrant Tilbury woods had grown in him the remarkable strength to break wood into bits. And years of loneliness had taught him how to do what only one who loved his people from the outside looking in could ever do. He was the only Dellblood who could, or ever would, dare to fell the sacred tree. Dazed by the horror of what was unfolding before them, the Dellblood stood dumbstruck until one of Kaleb's blows gave way to a snapping, creaking noise at the base of the sacred tree. The upper branches shook, tussling leaves against each other as the trunk began its slow descent toward the ground. When the tree finally collided with the earth, a cloud of dust flew up and enveloped the clearing. Mixed in with the dust were sparkling particles of bright green light, like disembodied fireflies dancing under moonlight. The green cloud of sparks and dust swept through the crowd, leaving a rich and holy scent in the nostrils of everyone present. "What is this?" one woman in the crowd asked. "What has he done?" No one could answer her. The Dellbloods breathed quietly and waited for something to happen. Finally, Feralus broke the silence as the green smoke began to dissipate, wafting up into the treetops above them. "You've ruined us, Kaleb," he hissed. "You've taken from us the one thing that stood between our people and the threats outside Glenward." All the beasts and humans present turned to look at Kaleb, awaiting his reply. "I have not," Kaleb said, after catching his breath and setting his axe against the stump of the tree. "I'm saving you. You and all your people." "Saving us from what?" Feralus said. Before Kaleb could answer, a confused shriek rang out in the clearing. Glista ran toward the source of the noise, pushing 2 or 3 Dellbloods out of her way. When she reached the source of the noise, she saw a little girl pointing up at her mother's face. "Mommy, your mark is gone." The mother's eyes flitted from one face in the crowd to another. Then she covered her mouth with both hands as though stifling a scream. Soon every Dellblood was gazing in wonder at the faces around him or her. "It can't be," said Feralus, reaching up and running his fingertips along his own brow. After wiping cold tears and wood chips from his cheeks with the back of his hand, Kaleb stared through the pale starlight at his people and smiled. Every last mark had disappeared from their foreheads.